Fear Zone, your channel of haunted stories and horror. Good evening, everyone, and let's go to the story of today, which is of Mr. Mauricio, and it happened to him in the city of Batatais, which is in the state of Sao Paulo, and at that time, which was in the year 2015, Mr. Mauricio had 36 years. And it all started like this. I work with Uber in my city, which is like a cab service, and being so, one day in the afternoon, I went to pick up a passenger at the bus station in my city, and arriving at this location, soon a man came near my car, and he was the passenger that I had gone to pick up. Then this passenger, who seemed to be around 30 years old, he got into my car, and then he indicated the place where he wanted to go, and I started the trip. After some time I arrived in a neighborhood where many houses were still under construction, but near this village there were many dark and scary woods. Anyway, this man ended up going down to a house that rented rooms and was talking to the owner of the place. Soon after, this passenger paid me, so I left there and went back to my job to make more trips. Soon after, this passenger paid me, so I left there and went back to my work to make more trips. But the next day, at night, I was cleaning my car inside, and I saw a document card inside the car, and so I took the document and looked. Then I remembered the photo, that it was of that guy that I had taken in that house that rented rooms in the rural village. Well, after I worked during the day, I went by car to the rural village to deliver the man's document, and arriving at the house of this man who rented rooms, I got out of the car. I went to the front of the residence to call the man and deliver his document. Then this guy came to meet me at the gate of the house, but he was strange and in a hurry, so I already gave him the document and then started my car and took my way back to my house. Finally, passing through a dirt road, which was a very dark place, and with many woods. However, in the middle of this road, I saw a warehouse that was like a roadside bar, where there were some men drinking in this place, and this made me want to drink something, so I decided to stop my car in front of this place and entered this bar, and ordered a beer, and started drinking and talking a little. The time went by, and when it was about 11 o'clock at night, suddenly I saw a man walking in the street, and as soon as he passed in front of the bar, I noticed that it was the man I had just handed his document to. The fact is, I found this strange, because I thought, how did he have the courage to walk on the dark road, and so late at night? I thought he would stop at the bar, but to my surprise, this guy walked by in a big hurry, and he didn't even see the bar, and he kept walking and disappeared into the road. However, I left it at that, continued drinking, and soon after, the two men who were at the bar drinking left the place. As time passed, just as I was about to leave the bar, suddenly those two men who had just left the bar came running back to the bar very scared, and they started talking that there was a huge creature with red eyes that looked like a bizarre dog, and this beast was on the road, and it looked like a dangerous animal. One of these men said that maybe this creature was a wolf. These two guys didn't want to leave on foot, and they asked the owner of the bar if he didn't have some weapon, because this dangerous animal was for sure still around, because it could appear at any time in front of his shop. The owner of the bar was in doubt as to whether he would join the conversation of these two guys, but the owner of the bar said that his gun was inside his house, which was behind the establishment, and in all of this, I went to the street and started looking down the dirt road to see if I could find the animal, and that's when I saw a black figure of a beast about 30 meters ahead, but I didn't even know what it was. But the beast stopped walking on the road, and it went into the bush quickly. and disappeared. I found it very strange what that animal did, and surely it could be with the intention of hunting us. Then I told the owner of the bar that there really was a beast around, and so I told the owner to close the bar, because I was going to take the two men away to their homes. These two men got into my car, and the owner of the bar closed his business, and then I started the car, and the two men told me to drive by the animal so that we could see what the beast was. So I drove the car slowly, and as soon as I got close to where the beast was hiding, I stopped my car, but the light from the car's headlight scared the animal, and the creature ran away. But I was really scared by what I saw, because it was a beast very similar to a dog, but much bigger. But I was following this animal by the road, and arriving in a dirt road, I saw this creature trying to pass through a barbed wire fence. And so I cornered this beast, and this creature was kind of confused and scared by the light of the car headlight. And while we were looking at this creature, and it was at this moment that I got a fright, because this animal was standing on only two legs, and he tried to go over the fence, but his coat tangled in the wires of the fence. At this time I thought that for sure it was a werewolf, this beast, because he had a body like a man's body, but with a dark and flawed coat, and his arms were like those of a man, but his head was identical to that of a dog. And the ears of this beast were big, but the legs of this werewolf were like those of an animal, kind of broken back. I was scared with the bizarre appearance of this werewolf, but the eyes of this creature were red, and not yellow as most reports and stories say. But other than that, he couldn't get through the fence, because his fur tangled in the wires of the fence. But the creature gave up on getting through the fence, and he crouched down and stood like a dog on four legs on the ground, and this werewolf ran towards the street and passed to the other side of the road and disappeared into the dark woods. And what I did next was to drive back to the bar, and I told the owner of the bar not to go out on the street because it was very dangerous, and I warned him that what was prowling around nearby was a werewolf, and this bar owner was very scared. Anyway, I took the two men with my car and left them at the house of one of them, and so later I went back to my house, but I was perplexed by what happened. But the next day, I kept thinking about this creature, and I was worried because it was something dangerous, this beast, and it could attack someone. However, soon I remembered the man where I gave his document, and I was worried about this guy because he passed in front of the bar, and after some time, that werewolf appeared. I even thought that the werewolf could have attacked him on that dirt road. Then I decided to go to the house where he was living to see if nothing had happened to him, and that I took my car. I went to the residence where this guy had rented a room, and arriving there, who answered was the owner of the inn. Then I asked about the man with the document, and the owner of the house told me that this guy with the document arrived at the house in the morning and got his travel bag and paid his daily rate and left. I found it a little strange, this story, him leaving suddenly, but at least he was okay. The next day, I went back to the bar on the road where I had seen the werewolf and talked to the owner of the bar, and he told me that at night he would no longer open his shop. The fact is, I thought and began to suspect that the guy with the document was the suspected werewolf. Well, I can't say that that man was the werewolf, but from the clues, he was the suspect. After this experience that I had with this beast that I saw in front of me, I wonder how many times these creatures have attacked people in Brazil and other places in the world, because these werewolves exist, and this was my experience of terror that I lived. Good guys, if you liked the story, like and subscribe to the channel until the next story. Canal Fear Zone, your channel of haunted stories. And here, you will find real stories which may be true, in which are ordinary people who relate their experiences that lived with a werewolf. And now, let's go to one more horror story, which is from a young man named Rodrigo, and this happened to him in the year 2008 and was in the city of Irati, which is in the state of Parana in Brazil. And to begin this story, I live in a neighborhood on the outskirts of the city where there are many forests around, and at that time, I was just a very small boy. But to begin my story is that my grandfather lived on a small farm where I always spent the weekends on his property. One day I was having fun on my grandfather's farm where there were many trees and various fruit trees, and then I was playing on the property with the dogs. But the fact is, that day, when I was at my grandfather's house, something happened at dawn, because suddenly his dogs started barking a lot, and it seemed that there was something in the place that the dogs wanted to attack, because then I started to hear the dogs running from one side to the other, and they were after something. But I realized that my grandfather woke up, and he turned on the lights. And he started to walk around the house to see what was happening. Then he went to the backyard. I was curious, and started to look out the window to see what was happening, and I saw my grandfather with a rifle in his hands, and he was walking with the dogs in the pasture, and seemed to be looking for something. But suddenly, when I looked near some trees, I got a big scare, because there was something there, and it seemed to be a man hiding behind a tree, but in that area of the farm it was dark, and you couldn't see what was there. But I also realized what was hiding. It kept looking in my grandfather's direction, and soon that shadow changed trees, and was hiding chasing my grandfather. I saw the danger. I shouted to him that there was something behind the tree, and it was at this moment that he pointed the rifle in the direction of the trees, but that shadow did not come out from behind the trunk, and the dogs were afraid of that, and kept barking from afar. My grandfather told that figure to get out of there, because he was going to shoot it, but I think the creature growled at my grandfather, kind of challenging him. Then the old man fired 2 shots at the trunk where the figure was hiding, but the thing ran out on its feet and went to the pasture, and by that time I saw that it was a creature, and this animal soon got on all fours and started running away, and seeing that it was coming towards me, I closed the window quickly and locked the door of the house, and I was very scared to see it, because it was something weird, because its body looked like a man's body, and it had a dog's head, and its fur was black. Other than that, I heard another shot, and with that I looked out the window again, and saw the creature running already outside the farm, and my grandfather hurrying back to the house, so I opened the door for him to come in, and my grandfather stayed awake and on guard with the rifle in his hands. My grandmother also woke up this dawn, but she was calmed down by my grandfather, who said it was just an invading animal. After a few hours, the day dawned, and the werewolf did not appear. However, my father came to pick me up to return home, but in this I saw my grandfather talking with my father, and they said it was a werewolf that entered the farm. Well, the fact that also I realized that at that time was that my father and grandfather drove their pickup truck around the region for several nights, and they were after this werewolf, but they found nothing, and not a clue of this creature. With all that happened, I was traumatized with this horror story that I spent with the werewolf, and for a long time did not return to the farm of my grandfather. Time passed, and even today I remember the dawn that I really saw that werewolf, and never forget it. And this was my real story. I spent the danger with the werewolf invader. Guys, if you liked the video, give a like and subscribe to our channel Fear Zone. Fear Zone, your channel of real horror stories. Good evening everyone, and we go to the story of today, which is Mr. Valder, and it happened to him in the city of Myuu, which is in Brazil, and this report was in the year 2010, when Mr. Valder was 32 years old. And today I will tell my story, and show how these werewolves are violent creatures, because I had to save the life of a person who was attacked by a werewolf. And it all started like this. At that time of the occurrence, I was working as a pizza delivery boy at night, and I worked until about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I lived in a normal neighborhood in my city. But one day when I was coming home from work at the crack of dawn, something happened in my life that I will never forget, because I was riding my motorcycle along a dirt road that I always took to get back home faster. And that's when I heard on my way someone screaming for help, and I saw through the headlight of my motorcycle a huge animal, and it was chasing a man through the middle of the dirt road, so I increased the speed of the motorcycle to see better what was happening. I started following the animal along the road, and also honking my motorcycle horn, to see if the animal would stop running after the man, and at that moment that huge creature stopped running, and stayed on the road waiting for me. But I found it strange the way this animal was watching me, and it was certainly afraid of the light from my motorcycle's headlight, but I stood there to see if the creature would go away so I could continue my trip. While I was thinking about what I was going to do, I looked right at that strange animal, and got a fright, because this animal had its eyes lit up. I found this very strange, and also, I didn't know what it was, but the animal was very quiet there. I even think that it was standing still, just waiting for me to pass by it, for this animal to attack me. The fact is that that dirt road was very dark. The beast was about 20 meters away from me, and even so, I was still a little afraid, because of the size of this beast. But as I wanted to go through that road anyway, I did something at that time that I regretted, and was that I threw the light of the bike in the face of this animal, and I've honked several times, but the reaction of this creature was amazing, because the animal got up and stood up like a man, and I was very scared at that time, because what I was seeing was a werewolf for sure, and this animal was still looking at me angry, but it seemed that the light of the bike prevented this beast to come to attack me. But the werewolf, then, he ran into the woods beside the road, and with the action of this creature, I turned my bike back to where I was coming from, and after I arrived in a nearby neighborhood, I took another path, and thus managed to get to my house. Well, I was already inside my house, and I kept thinking about the werewolf that I had just seen on the road, and also about the man who was running away from the werewolf, and how lucky he was that I was on that dirt road at that time, and was able to distract the beast so that he could escape. And I never again passed that dirt road at night, and after this event in my life, I became more attentive and smarter, to walk the streets deserted and dark at night, not to be surprised again by this creature, and that was my horror story. Hello everyone, if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and leave your like, to receive more content from our channel Fear Zone. Fear Zone, your channel of horror stories. And now we go to today's story, which is from Mr. Andre, and this happened to him in the city of Alfenas, which is in Brazil, and at that time, which was in the year 2005, Mr. Andre was 22 years old. Today, I am going to talk about something that happened to me when I went to help a friend of mine in the wee hours of the morning, for something impressive and supernatural happened in front of me, and the danger of terror surrounded me that day. And it all starts like this. At that time I was already a man, but still quite young, and sometimes I worked helping a caretaker who lived on a farm near my neighborhood. One night, I was in a bar drinking with some friends, and it was that suddenly an old man that I knew appeared in the bar, and he told us a strange thing. This old man said that he was going home, and he had to cross a creek to get to his neighborhood, and that's when he saw something on the other side of the creek, and it was a kind of big animal coming out of the bush, and it was on 4 legs, and this old man, seeing that this animal could be very dangerous, he hid behind some bushes, and he stood still just watching that beast, and suddenly the creature came down the creek. But he didn't cross over there because of the water. But what happened is that the creature stood up like a man and started to walk on 2 legs, and it was already passing through a part of the creek where there was little water, and then this werewolf crossed the creek and started to sniff the air in the direction of the old man, but the creature hid in the bushes, and so everything started to get dangerous, and that gentleman wouldn't wait for the werewolf to find him. And he was walking quietly through the woods, and he got close to a street, and he stayed hidden and looking around to see where the werewolf was hiding, and that's when he saw that creature again. And the most impressive thing is that the werewolf was already in that place where the old man was hiding before, when he had seen the werewolf trying to cross the creek, and that farmer was thankful that he had left that place, because if he had stayed there, in that part of the bush near the creek, the werewolf would have found him. Well, and as soon as this farmer took advantage that the werewolf was distracted, trying to find him in the woods, the old man managed to escape to a nearby neighborhood. And he warned us not to walk at night near the woods, so that we wouldn't run the risk of finding this werewolf in front of us. Anyway, I was not worried about this story that this man told me, because he sometimes got drunk and always returned to his house at night. So the days went by, and one night I was in front of my house, but suddenly a man walked by my street, and soon he stopped on the street and started looking inside his bag, and it seemed that there was a chicken or a live animal inside this bag. Anyway, this guy then continued walking along the road, and then he went into a bush. Next, I saw a friend of mine walking down the street, and he looked like he was looking for something, so I went to talk to him, and this friend of mine told me that he was looking for a suspicious man with a bag, because his son said that he saw this suspect stealing a chicken from his yard. Well, I told him about this strange guy who was carrying something in a bag, and that he had gone into the bushes. In this conversation, we decided to go into the bushes to follow the suspect and catch him in the act. However, the farmer and I entered the underbrush and started looking for the man with the bag, but the underbrush was very dark and we couldn't see anything. But after walking a bit through the woods, we saw a light from afar, and it seemed to be a bonfire, so we went in the direction of this fire. As soon as we got to the place of the fire, we didn't see anyone, but there by the fire, the suspect's bag was nearby. We looked inside the bag, and indeed my friend's chicken was inside this bag, so my friend and I climbed a nearby tree to wait for the suspect to come back for the chicken so we could capture him, and we left the bag with the chicken inside in the same place. But while we were up in the tree, I saw some clothes lying on the ground nearby, and I started to think it was strange, because they were the clothes of the man in the bag. After half an hour, we were up in the tree waiting for the suspect, but we heard some noises in the bushes, and to our surprise, we saw a strange animal coming close to the bag, and it was a bizarre kind of dog, but it was very big too. At this time I was amazed to see this creature. But this beast, to our surprise, he got down on his knees, as if he were a person, and tore the bag with his hands, and I thought, this creature is a werewolf. Then, this werewolf held the bird with his hands, and it stood upright like people, only on 2 legs, and in a short time the werewolf ate the whole chicken. I was very afraid, because this beast looked like a hairy devil. Finally, This werewolf became suspicious of something, for he began to sniff the air, but the burning fire prevented him from getting close to our tree. But to our luck, and this werewolf stood on 4 legs and disappeared into the undergrowth, so we decided to stay in the tree, because we didn't want to run the risk of going down and the werewolf catching us. But what happened is that we spent the whole dawn on top of the tree, and the creature didn't come back, but as soon as it came daylight, we decided, and got down from the tree, but we started running fast through the bushes to get out of that place, and in all this running, we saw something running in front of us too. I thought it was the werewolf, and stopped running in that direction, but on a better look, it was that man with the bag, but he was naked and without clothes, and running in the bushes too. He thought we were chasing him, and he disappeared into the bushes. But finally, we were so scared that we left this suspect behind and kept running. However, after a lot of running, we managed to get to my house. And more calmly, my friend and I talked about the werewolf, and of course, we came to the conclusion that the chicken thief was the werewolf. The fact is, I was amazed at what I saw, and thinking about this situation, that surely the people in the region were at risk of that animal walking through the village. As the days passed, my friend and I looked for the guy who was turning into a werewolf in my neighborhood, but we couldn't find him, and maybe the suspect who was running naked in the woods already understood that we knew he was the werewolf, and that's why he disappeared, not to be hunted by us. And for me too, this guy was the same werewolf that the old man in the bar saw near the creek. But years have passed of this horror story of mine, and nowadays, sometimes, I am reminded of those images, of the wanderer and the werewolf, and this keeps me on my toes, because these creatures are real and they attack people. Thanks for watching the video, and if you like the story, leave your like, and subscribe to the Fear Zone channel, until the next scary werewolf story. Fear Zone, your channel of scary stories. And now we go to the story of today, which is of Mr. Andre, and this happened to him in the city of Rio Claro, which is in Brazil, and at that time, which was in the year 2008, Mr. Andre was 41 years old. And everything starts like this. I live in a normal neighborhood in my city, where there are many houses, but at that time, I worked in a company that was on a highway in the city, and as I worked until 10 o'clock at night in this service, I would only get home around midnight. But now I will tell you what happened to me on a certain day, which was like this. I was returning from my job at night with my automobile, and then I went to a snack bar to buy some snacks for my family, and as soon as I left this place, it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. The fact is, I took my way to my neighborhood, but the place that I passed with my car was to cut through the roads and get to my house faster. Well, the roads were all dirt, and everything was normal as usual, but it was very dark in that place. By the time I got to a part of that road, I saw something running by on that dirt road, and the strange thing was that it was an animal that looked like a big dog. I was surprised, because this animal was carrying a kind of goat in its mouth, and as this animal was a little scared by the light of the headlight, this animal ended up releasing this goat in the middle of the street that I was passing, and this beast went into the forest. It seemed that it had disappeared. But of course, I didn't get out of the car, because I wasn't so sure that it was a dog that crossed in front of me. It could be some kind of dangerous animal. At that moment, I couldn't go through that road, because the goat that was lying on the ground was still alive, and this animal, it tried to get up and fell down, and of course it was really hurt, and I could see all this with the headlight of my car. So, I thought I would get out of the car, to get this goat off the road, and of course, I kept looking around the surrounding woods to see if I could find this dog-like creature around, because I was still scared of it. While I was trying to see something, I didn't see that creature anymore, and what I did was to get closer to the animal in the middle of the road. However, I ended up getting out of my car, and even though I was scared of that place, which is only of dark forest, and with many trees around, I walked with fear to where the goat was lying, and soon I grabbed the legs of that animal, and I was dragging it to the side of the road. But then, something happened, because I just heard some footsteps near me, and when I looked, it was an animal, which jumped from a small ravine, and advanced towards me. With the attack of this beast, which seemed to be something huge, I ended up rolling on the ground with that impact. At the time, or I got up quickly to see what tried to catch me, and when I look at it, I got scared as it was in front of me, and it was a huge and strange creature, because it wasn't a dog at all, and it seemed to be more of a deformed monkey. What caused fear is that it seemed to be a supernatural creature because of the glow it had in its eyes. The problem was that I couldn't run and get into my car, because this beast was very close to the car door, which I had left open. In this hour of danger, when this creature was surrounding me, I put my hand in my pocket to get a pocket knife and to defend myself, and then I was surprised, because this animal stopped. He started to look at me. He kept looking at my hand, kind of thinking I was reaching for a gun in my waistband, and I realized this. I put my hand in my waistband and pretended to have a gun, but to my amazement, what that creature did was something unbelievable. This animal stood on 2 legs only, and he shivered his hair and started growling low and angry to see if it would make me run away in fear of him. But I didn't fall for the monster's deception. I took my wallet, which was black, in my back pocket and put it in the front of my pants, and pretended that I was going to take my gun from the waistband of my pants. And when I did that, the creature got scared and ran standing behind my car. And I also got scared with the reaction of that animal and ran to the bush, which was on the side of the road, and hid myself there and stayed quiet so that the werewolf wouldn't see me there. And I say that this creature was one of those, because it stood upright like a man, and could walk on 2 legs, and it had ears like a dog's, and its body was all hairy with a dark color, and this creature was about the same size as an adult person, but its appearance was of a very thin creature, so for me, this monster was a werewolf. But apart from this description, what I did is that I stayed there near the edge of the road, crouched in the bush, just looking and seeing where the werewolf could be. I even looked near my car, because I thought that this creature could have entered inside my car, but fortunately, I didn't see this werewolf anymore, and I waited about 10 more minutes. Soon a car passed by on the road, and by the light of the headlight, I saw the figure of this creature far away. With that, I ran towards my automobile and got into my car, and soon started it, and managed to get off that road all terrified with what I had gone through. Anyway, I arrived at my house, and I was already at my residence, and I kept thinking about this situation, in which I was attacked by a werewolf, and I might not even be alive now, and this creature is not that supernatural, because this beast was flesh and blood, and is afraid of firearms, because this is what saved me, that I pretended to be armed, and so I managed to fool this beast, threatening him. But the point is, the werewolf understands what a firearm is, and this shows the intelligence of this creature. Of course, after this experience, I began to reason also, if this creature would be a man and transform itself into a creature, and this I don't know yet, but I know that this beast exists, and it is real. However, days went by, and I never again walked down that dirt road where I had this experience with the werewolf. But one day, On a TV news program, some police officers shot a maned wolf in a farm near my neighborhood. I found this very strange, because I have never heard of these animals in my city, and also, the maned wolves are not allowed to be killed, because they are an endangered animal. Other than that, the maned wolf is a calm animal and doesn't attack people. I found it strange that these policemen killed this animal, but I suspect that it was the werewolf that the policemen killed. But at least, I haven't heard anyone talking about this werewolf. And I don't want to see this creature ever again. Thank you for watching the video, and if you like it, please like, share this story, and also subscribe to our Fear Zone channel to receive new videos every week. See you next time. Fear Zone, your channel of horror stories. Good evening everyone, and today's story is The Cursed Farm. So now, let's go to the story. Well, my name is Orlando. This story happened to me in the region of the city of Pelotas, which is in Brazil. This event was in the year 1987, and at that time I was 31 years old. And to begin the story, in the region where I lived was a rural area, where there were many farms and ranches, and even some villages, and this region had a large farm, where they had coffee plantations, and raised pigs, chickens, and cattle in large quantities, and this farm had some employees. Well, many people in the region wanted to work on this farm, but so far so good. But the fact is that I learned, through a friend who worked on this farm, that from 1 hour to the next, the caretaker of this farm left his job and disappeared, and never came back, and nobody knew what happened to this man. And as I was unemployed at that time, I went to talk to the foreman of this farm, where the caretaker had disappeared. Finally, by luck I got this job. Anyway, soon I started working, and a few months passed. Everything was normal, until one day in the morning, when I went to feed the animals, I saw that there was a large amount of dead farm animals on the farm, and several chickens died, and some horses and cows, and worst of all, it seemed that it was a supernatural thing that had happened, because these animals were very healthy, and were not sick, and also, there was no sign of attack from any predatory animal. Simply these animals appeared dead for no reason. The foreman of this farm told me not to worry about it, and to continue my work, and forget about this event. But after this story of the deaths of the animals, more than 2 months passed. One day, I was looking for some keys that I had lost around the farm, and it was already late at night, finally, and I was walking near the boss's house, which was inside the farm, who was the owner of the farm, and I heard that he was talking to someone. I was curious and stopped by the window, and soon I saw that my boss was arguing and talking with a very old man there inside his house, and my boss was saying, "Not now, not now," and it seemed that he had some debt with the old man. After a while, I became afraid that someone would see me walking around there, so I ended up leaving my boss' house, and I went back to my residence and went to sleep. But when the day dawned, I went to work around the farm. But what happened is that once again, another disgrace happened on the farm, because many cows and horses died, and also chickens on the farm. But to my surprise, it was the same as the other time, without any predator animal attack, without any attack marks. The animals simply appeared dead from one day to the next, without any explanation. The farm foreman told me not to worry about this problem. I was just supposed to help him put the bodies of the animals in the truck to be taken to bury them. But this time, besides the death of the animals, more misfortune began to happen on the farm, because the boss's wife and his son, who lived on the farm, got a serious disease. They were between life and death, and with all this misfortune, I didn't understand why my boss still didn't bring a priest or a pastor to the farm to expel something bad and supernatural that could be haunting the farm, because it was an evil that was repeating itself there, because it was the second time that the deaths of animals happened in a strange and identical way. But a few weeks later, after this occurrence, another tragedy happened on the farm, because my boss suddenly appeared dead hanging from a rope tied to a tree on his farm. It was a very strange thing. How could someone so rich have taken his own life like that? Because the police made several investigations on the farm, and the forensics found that the farmer himself, he took the rope by himself, and went to the tree and took his own life. But what happened is that after my boss died, a little time passed, and his wife and his son, who were sick and almost dying, from 1 hour to another, they were cured of their serious illness and went back to their normal lives, and it even seemed like magic that the boss's wife and son were cured, but it seemed that they had got rid of some spell connected to the boss's death. However, what happened was that when my boss died, a big legal battle began over the inheritance of the man, and then the land and the cattle and the animals were sold by his wife and his children and relatives, and with this, the employees ended up losing their jobs. I also ended up losing my job at the farm, and I ended up going back to the village where I lived. In all this, a few months passed, and one day, I was in a bar drinking beer, and I suddenly saw an old man come into the bar, whom I had seen somewhere before, and I soon remembered that this old man was the same man who was talking to my boss when I looked through the window of my boss's window one day on the farm. And I didn't even need to call the old man to talk. He already came to my table, and soon we started talking, and I asked him where he knew my former boss from, who had taken his own life. This old man told me that he was the old farm caretaker and left the farm. And the old man said that he also knew my former boss for a long time, since he was a young and poor man. Then the old man said that he helped my boss become a rich man and buy several lands and farms and have a lot of money. I started to get suspicious about the whole story, but I just listened to the old caretaker talk. But I asked him if he knew anything about why the animals on the farm suddenly died without being hurt or having any kind of disease. The old farm manager said that my former employer had overdue a certain debt, and he did not want to pay this debt, and while he was not paying this debt, his animals and his closest relatives would die because his account was overdue. It is as if the former employer did not want to pay his debt, and then the animals were killed, and his relatives got sick, until it happened that the ex-boss died. And then everything went back to normal, and his relatives were suddenly cured of their illness. And this was actually only part of the curse, and the animals suddenly stopped dying, because now the curse on the farm was over. But this old man, besides this strange conversation, he began to propose a deal with me, and he asked me if I wanted to be a millionaire and rich like the former boss, and have everything good that life offered. And the old man said, who was easy to achieve this, and that I just needed to give something I had of value. Of course I did not want. I thought it was a joke, and soon left this old man sitting alone at the bar table, and I went to the barkeep's counter to pay the bills. When I was leaving the bar, I looked back and saw this old man touching his hat, which he wore on his head, and it seemed that it was my impression, because I saw that this old man had 2 small horns on his forehead. I was scared by what I saw, but I looked again, where the old man was sitting, and I realized that he had disappeared from the place. It was like he had suddenly disappeared, like magic, and it was an amazing thing that I had seen there, because for me, what that old man was doing was a deal with me, and with those two horns on that man's forehead, he was the bad thing from hell himself. Then I started thinking about the whole story of my boss, and this old caretaker on the farm, and then I connected this whole story of this curse, that it actually happened. The bad thing was disguised as an old caretaker. My former boss would have sold his soul to get rich, and when the time came to pay with his life, he did not want to pay this debt, and during this time, while he did not pay, the farm was under a curse, until the boss paid his debt with his life. Well, that was my conclusion to this whole story, and of course, I don't really like to remember that old farmer talking to me in that bar, because it gives me the creeps to remember that moment with that old devil. I know this story is heavy, but this was my real horror story, and I hope that this experience of mine serves as an example to people not to want to be rich the easy way like that, because the charge will come someday. Good night. Well guys, if you liked the story, subscribe to our channel Fear Zone, and leave a like to help. Until the next video. Fear Zone, your channel of real horror stories. And now, let's go to today's story, which is from Mr. Luiz, and this happened to him in the city of Poços de Caldas, which is in Brazil, and at that time, that was in the year 1990, Mr. Luiz was 46 years old. And everything starts like this. I lived at that time, with my family, in a village of my city, which was a rural village. But what happened once was that one of my neighbors moved from my neighborhood because he had got a very good job in another city, and so he left his house to rent and went away from our neighborhood. With this passed about a month, and a man who was about 35 years old and was single ended up renting this residence of my former neighbor who had gone to another city. One day, I found this new neighbor walking down the street in the village and talked a little with him, and ended up knowing that this man came to live in our village, to work in a factory at dawn until dawn. Well, and what I know about this guy too, is that he was a guy who talked little and didn't like to answer many questions. But a few days passed, and I started hearing some strange stories in my neighborhood that a person had seen a kind of demon in the woods, and that this creature made a roaring noise with a deep and scary sound, and other people also said it was a werewolf. And with all this talk, neighbors and acquaintances of the neighborhood avoided going out on the streets at night, and because of many reports told by people, all residents feared this creature. But what happened is that I noticed that my new neighbor didn't care about this werewolf story that people said they had seen around the village, and he still, at night, my new neighbor, walked the streets, which was in case he went to work, and he only came back early in the morning, when the day was clearing up. But the strange thing is that this man didn't leave his house, not even on his days off. He was more locked inside the house, and it seemed that he was hiding from people. But one day, a resident of my street said that he saw this new neighbor come in the morning, passing by on the street, and he was walking with a limp, and his face was swollen and bruised. After I learned about this, the conversation spread that he had been attacked by the beast, because this neighbor was the only guy who sometimes walked around the village late at night. I was worried about the guy, because he didn't have any relatives nearby. So I went to his house to find out what had happened to this neighbor of mine. Then I saw him arriving at his house, and went to talk to him, and this neighbor told me that when he got off the bus to leave, 2 bandits robbed him and ended up beating him, and I noticed that this man was really hurt, and as this guy did not want to talk to me much, I left this guy there and went away. But I did not believe this story that the bandits beat him. There was some mystery in it all. One day, I went to a bar near my house and stayed there drinking until about 10 p.m., and when I left the bar, a friend of mine who lived in the same neighborhood, accompanied me going away together with me. And while me and my partner from the bar were walking down the road, we saw my new neighbor on the street, and this guy stopped at a certain point of the dirt road, and he went into a dark bush, but my partner from the bar agreed that we would follow the guy through the woods, because this new neighbor was a man who seemed to have many secrets. So we went after the guy who went into the dark woods to see what he was doing there at that time of night. We entered this forest and went after my neighbor, and after chasing him for about 10 minutes, we saw that he turned on the flashlight near a tree, and he stood there. We were 15 meters away from this man. We even thought that he was going to use some kind of drugs, but then this man looked like he started to get sick, and he also took his clothes off his body and he was naked, and soon this guy started to say some words like this, "I don't want to turn this, I don't want to turn this," and he kept repeating these phrases over and over again. We were startled at that moment because he looked like he was summoning something supernatural. But suddenly this man fell to the ground, and he started rolling around on the ground and struggling, and it looked like he was having some kind of epileptic seizure, but as the light from the flashlight was falling on the ground, you could see a little bit by the brightness of the light that this guy was getting hairier and hairier, and the most frightening thing is that his eyes were like a yellowish light that went on and off, and it was a very strange thing indeed. And when this man lifted you off the ground and stood up, I almost froze with fear, because what we were seeing was already a creature, half human and half animal, because that guy's mouth already had a snout like a dog's, and his ears were very big. In this hour of danger, my friend who was there with me ended up gesturing with his hands for us to get out of there quietly. While the werewolf finished his transformation, we left the forest in a big hurry, and as soon as we got to the dirt road, we started running to our houses, and I, already at my residence, kept looking through the window in the direction of my new neighbor's house. Because he was the werewolf. The fact is that the creature that he transformed himself into did not appear at dawn on my street. But when dawn came, this guy arrived at his house normally as a man, and then he locked himself in his residence. But when the afternoon came, I went to find my friend, who saw the creature in the woods with me. I talked to him, and we came to the conclusion that it was better to stay put until we see what we would do to solve this case of terror, to catch this guy by surprise sometime in the woods, and to capture this werewolf. Well, but my colleague from the bar had already told his wife of what happened, and so complicated, because his wife was very gossipy, and she would spread this talk about the werewolf throughout the neighborhood. Anyway, maybe because this neighbor of mine lived in a strange way, people might believe this story from my friend's wife, even though this story was true. Well, and after a few days of this event, the whole neighborhood practically already knew more or less that my new neighbor had some connection with the creature that walked through the woods at dawn, and as people spoke in distrust of the residents, and this guy who turned werewolf locked himself even more inside his house, and no longer left the streets during the day. And the nights, when this guy went out to the streets, he stayed 3 to 4 days missing, and then appeared and hid in his house. But during this time also, I would get worried about the people in my neighborhood, and I would look all night at this neighbor's house to try to see anything strange around there. I also left my shotgun in the way, and prepared myself for the worst, in case the neighbor appeared nearby as a werewolf. But other than that, for a few days, a pickup truck belonging to a farmer started to pass by my street a few times during the day, and during the night, this pickup truck driver would drive his vehicle down the street, and he would pass looking at the residence of my werewolf neighbor, and I even think that my new neighbor noticed this, and he ended up disappearing from my village and never showed up again. After a few days, I saw a moving truck at the werewolf's house, and they moved all the furniture out of his house. For me, this was expected, because if he stayed longer in my neighborhood, more people would discover his secret, and he would run the risk of his life. And I also learned, with the passing of time, that my story about the werewolf reached some Kaipiras in the region, where the werewolf would have invaded their properties to get chickens and other livestock. But the Kaipiras let the dogs loose on the creature and beat the werewolf with a stick, and the beast ended up running away from the place all bruised, and because of this, my neighbor would show up bruised in the neighborhood in the morning. This truck that passed by my street belonged to a Kaipira, who was after the guy who turned into a werewolf, and all this was a friend of mine who already knew my story, who told me this other part of the story. And of course, after many people knew that the new neighbor had some relation with the creature of the night, the guy disappeared from the village, and with this, I heard no more about werewolf appearances. But in this story, I took a life lesson. I still suspect to this day that if you walk around in the woods at night, a werewolf may appear and attack you, because I saw that these creatures exist. Well, folks, and that was my supernatural experience that I had. And if you like the story, subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video. Until the next haunted story.